My name is Alex Pennington, and we are the Aspiring Writers United. Today, I'm here with Morgan Steffens. Did I pronounce that right?
Stevens.
Stevens. Sorry, I always get last names wrong.
It's
Um,
totally fine. It happens all the time.
Today, I'm here with Morgan Stevens. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So maybe just to start, kind of give us a quick summary of what happened to you. 'Cause I read your article, and you have a pretty crazy story.
Yeah. That's that I've been thinking about titles for my book, What Happened to Me. That's a light bulb just went off. Um, so I got COVID in 2020 with along with my family, my mom, my
Mhm.
dad, and my husband. We all got it. Uh, it just so happened that I was covering the 2020 presidential election at that time.
Wow.
And so I got COVID while I was covering that. I was quarantining while I was covering that election
Well, that was
with
fun.
COVID, but I didn't know it yet. I actually went to a hotel to quarantine because they tested positive while I was still testing negative. So in the rare case that I did not actually get infected, I
Yeah.
was quarantining in a comfort in.
Yeah.
So ended up testing positive though, and had kind of a mild infection, returned back to the home. And it wasn't until about 3 weeks after that initial COVID infection, I started to develop new, more severe symptoms. I remember it started with insomnia and kind of an internal quivering or shaking in my abdomen.
Mm.
Just, bizarre stuff that I had never
Yeah,
experienced
weird.
before. Yeah, just weird symptoms. And then it's kind of, well, it spiraled from there within a short period of time. I started to not be able to follow the plot of a movie, not be able to read, write. And not that I couldn't, all of a sudden I couldn't read or write, but it was the fogginess and the
Yeah.
lack of executive function that was happening in my brain. That's what kept me from being able to do those very,
Mhm.
what we consider simple human tasks. So during that time, it was about a 2.5 month period that I spent in North Carolina where it became dire. I experienced feelings of suicide
Oh my
because
gosh.
of the depression and the
Yeah.
anxiety that came along with all of these other neurological symptoms. Could not sleep, and doctors could not figure out what was wrong with me, or they had their own ideas of what kind of psychological diagnosis they wanted to give.
So they probably just thought it was like just a normal psychological thing or like,
Or yeah,
yeah,
I'd lost it, and
but that felt great to hear.
yeah, well, I was exhibiting such abrupt psychological distress,
Mm,
but if I think if they would have delved a little bit deeper, and
yeah.
of course this was 2020, early 2021, I don't really blame them, but if they would have delved a little bit deeper, maybe been a little bit more curious, they would have seen that there was all of these other symptoms that were kind of
Exactly.
happening.
It's like you have all this other weird stuff. It's like it's not just psychological.
Yeah. So, during that time, my family, they frankly kept me alive. It was an experience unlike any other. And that's what I plan on, of course, including in my book, those moments that even through
Mhm.
the brain fog that
Yeah.
that are seared into my memory that I want to share, as well as the kind of moment in history of getting an illness during a pandemic that people are unfamiliar with, and also being a woman and
Mhm.
what kind of things you face with that. And so yeah, I mean, during that time it was really tough, but of course I'm talking to you now, and I've healed enough to
You're doing
share
better.
that journey as well. And we left North Carolina, moved to California, where my husband is from and where we had lived before we had kind of transitioned to North Carolina. So moved back there and started getting some treatment at my alma mater's,
Mhm.
post-COVID clinic they were starting. And I started to heal and get better very, very slowly. And so, of course, including that journey as well. And healing, of course, as we know, looks different for different people with this
Yeah.
illness. That's what we're seeing. Like, I can't just say, okay, this is what worked for me, it's going to work for
Mm.
you. But I think also, documenting this journey, not only to share my own personal experience, because it was kind of this moment in history, as well as this intimate kind of um, lens, so to speak,
Uh,
into such a abrupt fall from, this promising career in journalism, but also, to use my journalistic skills. I went to school as and studied journalism, and I had just started my career. And so using that to kind of delve into what we're facing from someone such as myself who understands the illness not only as a patient, but as an observer
yeah.
by like applying those,
Mhm.
those reporting skills and looking at studies. And so that's kind of the journey so far.
Well, that's awesome. Like, well, I mean, I feel like long COVID is one of those things that not a lot of people know about. Like, the long-term
Oh,
effects are really not discussed. And I've met a couple people, I don't know if they specifically had long COVID, but, like, they've all had just like, they're negative, they've been negative, and they still have all these, like, either kinda illnesses or just, like, things that are permanently kinda wrong with them. Like, I knew one girl, she was a marathon runner before she got COVID, and she's like, "Yeah, I can't run anymore." Like, his lungs are destroyed like that. But so when it comes to, like, kinda like what you're wanting to write, why do you think it is that it's, like, not very mu how to word this? Why do you think it's not talked about very much? I mean, like, before I saw your stuff, I didn't really know what long COVID was at all. I'm pretty involved in the research and stuff.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. And that's a huge question of why, a lot of people may not know about long COVID, or if they do, they have a misunderstanding of what it really
Exactly.
is, right? They may have heard
Mhm.
it in passing. They may have been like, oh, well,
Yeah,
long COVID, maybe you just have some fatigue when after you're sick, and then you eventually return back to
exactly.
work. But it is a chronic and oftentimes disabling illness. We could start with the lack of public health messaging, right?
Yeah,
Uh, we know that President Biden, he mentioned it once. He was doing a kind of a
yeah.
presser at the White House, and he had said it could sometimes qualify as a disability. So that was the first kind of mention of it in a public political sphere.
Mhm.
But even going as far as the media coverage of it, right?
Dude, like, I admit it.
We're what are we, over 2 years and
Yeah.
almost 3 years into the pandemic, and I still see articles that are just talking about that it exists. They're
Mhm.
not moving the story forward.
They're not gonna, like, tell you, like, the symptoms or, like, what's actually happening. They'll kinda, like, mention it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, it's like, oh, well, Jane got sick and now she experiences fatigue and brain fog. And there's this thing called long COVID, but it's like,
Yeah.
okay, so we know that some people are experiencing symptoms after the illness, but let's try to move the story forward. What does that mean? Are people losing their
Exactly.
houses? Are people unable to
Mhm.
work? Are people cognitively impaired where they cannot
Mhm.
function? And there's been some great journalism that is kind of tackled this, but it's few and far between.
Not a
It's
lot.
still kind of, oh, there's this thing called long COVID, instead
Mhm.
of looking into now numerous studies that are showing biomedical changes
Yeah.
in people with long COVID, a lot of, damage with the blood vessels, a
Mhm.
lot of kind of inflammation in the brain that they're finding. And
It's a
so
pretty
there's
big side
physical, there's
effect.
physical, changes that are happening that um, deserve attention just as
Yeah.
much as, the pandemic is over, right? Like we all
I
have
saw he
pandemic
just declared that
fatigue.
like 2 days ago.
Yeah, yeah,
I
it was really hard to hear. I mean, I want, if anyone wants the pandemic to be over, it's me,
Yeah.
because I don't want to have to worry. I'm immunocompromised. I don't want to have to worry
Yeah.
about when I go out potentially getting sick.
Mhm.
But the fact is that it's not. And
Yeah.
so anyway, we're kind of getting off topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's complicated, I think, to why it hasn't been front of mind. I will kind of wrap up answering your question by saying I think that there's economic interest at stake, perhaps.
Yeah.
And so acknowledging that there's a lot, for probably tens of millions of Americans who are disabled
Mhm.
right now from a pandemic that basically was just let loose.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of mitigation, and you know people are out of the workforce because of it, and
Yeah.
or people are only able to work part-time. And so
Mhm.
how are employers going to tackle that? And that kind of rests on the companies,
Yeah.
to do something, or our policymakers to do something to serve that population. And once you recognize it, you have to do something about it. So I don't again, lots of reasons, but I
Yeah.
wish it was more well known to
Mhm.
the every person, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, the fact is that it isn't. So
What was your recovery like? I didn't even know they had like post-COVID recovery centers. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they do, but I will say that excuse me. They have a lot of post-COVID recovery clinics across the country, but even those clinics are only able to offer so much because they're
Yeah.
still trying to understand our illness.
Mhm.
So you have people, the difference is you have people who are interested in learning about what is going on with you. They're not going
Mhm.
to gaslight you,
Yeah.
they're not going to, like, they know, they're following the research. Um, and so me going to a post-COVID clinic, it was helpful in that way.
Mhm.
I had gone through so much trauma in North Carolina with doctors
Yeah.
gaslighting me, or just saying, we don't know how to fix you. You're on your own, essentially.
What do you
Um,
do when you get told that? I mean, that must be like
you
the
shut
worst
down.
feeling in the world.
You shut down.
Yeah.
And being told that over and over and over when you're in
Yeah.
the most desperate time of your life. You're in the
That's
most
gotta be pretty
vulnerable time of your
hopeless.
life. It's
That'd be
it's
awful.
um, it's traumatizing. So these post-COVID clinics, they're helpful in some ways, but I
Mhm.
will also say they have limitations, right?
Yeah.
The intention to help is there, but there's still not a whole lot in terms of treatment for us. There's,
Yeah.
they may offer physical therapy, occupational therapy, and neurology like they did in my case.
Mhm.
But healing was really, I don't I don't want to say that healing was this or that or this, because there's so many things that I did throughout the course of a good 7 months from that initial infection that really, helped me move to the next level. And those were
Mhm.
small things. Like I could say, oh, well, being able to finally, sleep at night That was huge. That was
That
like
would.
allowing my brain to heal because,
Mhm.
and this is not hyperbole, but I did not sleep for 2.5
Ah,
months. And so imagine what that also does to the brain.
it'd just be
While
a
you're already
mess.
sick,
I mean,
yeah. So finally being given a medication that was effective and getting me to sleep, that was kind of step one, I think.
mhm,
And then, slowly doing small tasks. There was a point where making my own coffee in the morning and like a little breakfast with yogurt and berries was a huge achievement because
wow.
I was not able my brain could not compute at one point going to the fridge, opening it up, pulling the yogurt out, pulling the berries out, getting the coffee, finding the coffee. Like these were things that were not,
Yeah.
they did not compute at one point. So doing those, it showed me that I was healing whatever was going on internally that I'm
Mhm.
probably will never know.
Yeah.
Maybe I will, maybe, science will figure it out, but maybe I won't. But it was the kind of behavioral changes that showed me I was healing. My husband and I, when we were in California at that time,
Mhm.
I was taking very small walks, and
Okay.
we were staying with his sister at the time while we were finding a place back in
Mhm.
LA. And she lived in this beautiful, area of Southern California where it's kind of remote. And just taking walks in nature, I couldn't go far, but having that quiet, and not to
Nice.
say that meditation and prayer is going to heal you, because that's, I
Mhm.
don't want to say that,
Yeah.
but I think what it did was getting to a place, it got me out of crisis mode,
Yeah.
being in a space where I was taking very small walks. I was able at that point, my sound sensitivity had improved where I could
Mhm.
actually listen to guided meditations, because at one point I couldn't. It
Wow.
was like I had a concussion. I couldn't, the sounds were just jarring.
Jeez.
And the vertigo, I had constant
Yeah.
vertigo. Just the symptoms were just, it made life very difficult. So
I
as
can
those symptoms
imagine.
improved, being able to incorporate meditation and
Mhm.
prayer and spirituality, it helped, I think.
Yeah.
um, Being with family that was supportive and able to, when I couldn't do something and I was too tired to do it, having them there to make
Mhm.
dinner, having them there to, if I'm too tired, just turn on my bath for me before I go to sleep. Like little things like
Yeah.
that
But it's like
helped.
they're so hard for you to do. Like
Yeah.
those small tasks. So
Yeah.
did it feel like you were just I'm just trying to imagine like, could we all kind of know it's like to be in a bit of a fog because you're sick, but it's like that, but to the absolute extreme. God.
And to go from,
Yeah.
I think what I do want to highlight too in the book is to go from very high stress, high adrenaline, fast paced lifestyle covering, political um,
Yeah.
campaigns, elections, covering the president himself at one point. Like this is very fast
Wow.
paced, high stress work.
Mhm.
And to go from like, I'm starting my career and I worked so hard to do this. I went back to school and I'm
To
ready
doing it.
doing it. I had finally got there.
Mhm.
And then to fall from such a height was um
That'd be pretty
psychologically
rough. Mhm.
exactly. And like, and so I want to be careful, in the writing not to um psychologize the illness, but I do want to, with nuance, talk about
Mhm.
what a lot of people with long COVID go
Mhm.
through psychologically when you're
Yeah.
completely normal, so to speak. You're a marathon runner, like your friend,
Yeah.
and then you've lost everything that makes you you, and
It's like
you
a
are
significant
completely
part of your
debilitated.
personality just taken
Yes,
away.
you've lost everything, including your brain, right? And so what does that do? What place does that bring you to? And I've made the decision. I've been open about the kind of risk of suicide with people with
Yeah.
long COVID, and I want to make sure that I write about it again with nuance. But it is a risk, and there was the physical kind of change that happened that
Hmm.
I felt had changed in my brain, but there's also the psychological element of why I think people with long COVID are brought to that, because there's
Yeah.
no treatments, there's not a lot of recognition, like you say, there's not a lot of, you feel so alone and you feel without hope. And you're also suffering immensely, and you've lost everything, and you also don't have financial assistance. So where
Oh
does
yeah.
that lead someone? I certainly, you know, for a good, I'd say 3 months,
Mm.
it was dire straits in terms of
Wow.
wanting to stay alive.
I'm so
And so to
sorry.
be honest and open about that, um, it's important to me to share that, even if, I know a lot of this is still kind of stigmatized with
Oh
mental
yeah.
health. And I think sharing it, showing that you can make it kind of to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And
Because there's other people going through that right now.
yeah,
Like,
there's other people going through it, and there's people who have unfortunately acted and done
mm,
it that
yeah.
have long COVID. And I hope to, include their stories. But yes,
Because like, I
it's
mean, I'm just imagining like, so you have like some big career, and then this happens, and you're just, you lose everything, like whole personality, everything you've been building for gone. And then you get told by doctors, "Oh, sorry, we actually can't really do anything to help you." Like, man, that's like just saying, "Hey, you're just kind of screwed." And I just don't know how I'd even like fathom that, like getting told that over and over, especially. It's like, man, that's like getting told you've like terminal cancer. I mean, I don't know if that's like the best linkage, but it kind of is, because like, I mean, yeah, just having everything gone like that, and man,
and you don't know it. And even with cancer, I mean, God forbid, um, you receive that diagnosis,
yeah.
but you have a plan of action.
Exactly. There's things they can do opposed to just saying, "Sorry, there's not a
Yeah,
lot we can do to help you."
yeah,
Especially like I said, gaslighting you, and they try to make it just psychological, and because I mean, there obviously, like you said, there are big psychological components, but it's not. It's like it's a physical thing though, so there are things that they can do. So whenever you couldn't sleep, because I mean that would alone would like just destroy you mentally. Not going like, I don't it's like I've heard it said, like, if you go, like, 3 days without sleep, you're just a mess, so going weeks, I can't imagine. But, like, were they trying to get you on sleeping pills, or what they weren't working?
well, they were giving, and I'm very careful about going into exactly what I was prescribed,
Oh, yeah, you don't
because
gotta go into it.
yeah.
Yeah,
But they were giving, so the kind of sleeping uh trajectory, I suppose, was, they gave me some kind of weaker sleeping medications that were like
oh.
more in the antidepressant
You're just
class
a
of
little bit
medication.
stressed out and depressed, just
Yeah,
like
yeah. And they just weren't, I remember I would take them, and I would maybe be able to fall asleep for like an hour,
yeah.
and then I'd wake up and I had this like physical shaking, not
Mm-hmm.
tremors. I had tremors. And
Yeah.
so I would just spend the night laying in bed or moving from room to room because I had this kind of agitation that came with
Mm-hmm.
it, with this, like they call it this tired but wired feeling with, you get it a
Yeah.
lot with like the issues with your autonomic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it didn't work. And the doctors that we would go to, they were kind of reluctant to prescribe things that were stronger, or they said,
Yeah.
you gotta get in touch with psychiatry. And so what happened was, this is where it gets interesting, is because they said, get in touch with psychiatry. And so my mom at this point was scheduling all these appointments because I was gone.
Yeah.
And so there was a 2-month wait to see a
2
psychiatrist.
months?
And so we had to wait 2 months of me just suffering,
Wow.
unable to sleep. And
Wow.
that's an issue also journalistically that I would like to dive into, because that is
Yeah.
unacceptable. And
That's
during that time when I wasn't sleeping, waiting for this 2-month psychiatry appointment, which I didn't even know if it was going to help or not, but waiting for
yeah.
this, I became suicidal, right? So what does that do for people who are suffering and they can't get help?
I mean,
And
yeah, you can't put it like a potentially suicidal person on a 2-month wait for a psychologist. Like that,
so
that's
so
bad.
once I was able to see a psychiatrist, it was a horrible appointment, I will say, which I plan on including in my book.
Good.
I was I was misdiagnosed, I was
Yeah.
gaslit, but I was given really potent sleep medication.
There
So
you
it is a, again, everything about, and what makes this hard, with this book
go.
difficult, is these are nuanced issues, because
Mm-hmm.
even though it was a horrible appointment, I was finally given a medication that worked.
Yeah.
And so I saw this psychiatrist mid-February, and we left North Carolina at the end of February. So I had spent about a week of like maybe 6 hours, seven
Mm-hmm.
hours of sleep a night, which was huge at that point.
Yeah. But that felt
Um,
pretty nice.
and my deteriorating body was finally like, oh my goodness, and my brain was finally able to rest. But yeah, it's the what was also tough about the lack of sleep was that the suffering was so immense
Mm-hmm.
that sleep is our only respite, right? When we're
Yeah.
sick and we're feeling absolutely awful. I mean, I
Your
had
escape.
constant vertigo to where everything was kind of
Oh.
spinning to the left. And I felt like I was being, hung, and not hung, but like turned upside down, right?
Yeah.
Hung by the feet.
Mm-hmm.
And so having no respite from that for months does a lot to your mental health,
That
because
would
you
just be
think at night,
miserable.
you're like, okay, if I can just get through this day, if I can get
Mm-hmm.
through this day, if I can hold
Yeah.
on, I can at least escape for 7 to 8 hours at night
Mm-hmm.
and be, unconscious. And
Yeah.
I didn't have that. I had to suffer through all of that. And that takes a toll on a
Yeah.
person,
That'd just be
as well as their
exhausting.
family. This book
Yeah.
is about the impact that it has on families as well, and what the kind of hell that they were put through, and how it affected them,
That'd
and
be
the
horrible
strength.
watching your child go through that.
Exactly. The strength that my parents and my husband had to pull from
Mhm.
to keep me in the game.
Yeah, and just I kind of go back to and gaslit by doctors like that from their standpoint. It's like, dang, it's like, okay, now we need to find something else to do. Cause like, they can't just go home and say, okay, let's hope for the best. It's
Yeah,
like
there were many
they're
come to
probably just like
Jesus family
searching
meetings.
for some kind of next step or plan.
Yeah, yeah. There was a lot of family meetings
Yeah.
with um where I would kind of just sit there as like a shell of myself and hear my family try to discuss what to do. And it broke my heart, because it was weird how these symptoms also presented. Like I could hear what
Hmm.
was going on. I could always hear it, but
Yeah.
I couldn't, it was like a prison. I couldn't react. I couldn't
Yeah.
communicate. And
Oh,
yeah,
that'd feel awful. It's just kind of like you were just watching it from the inside, so to speak.
yeah.
Wow. What do you mean when you say like you kind of got like gaslit a lot by the doctors? Like, did they just think it was just like you losing it, or like you have a high stress job, or
Well, it was interesting because they would ask me, I didn't realize this until I started seeing doctors a lot, but they tend to ask you what you do.
yeah,
Like, why does that matter?
yeah,
Um, but maybe they think maybe it's like they want to, connect with a person and not.
uh-huh,
I don't know
sure,
what it is, but they would always ask me what I do, and I said, well, I work in news. I'm a journalist, and especially early on, we were at the height of the pandemic, and
mm,
so an example, I guess, of gaslighting would be I had one person, he was he wasn't this person wasn't a doctor, so to speak. He was a neurological chiropractor.
mm,
And he said, well, so you work in journalism, what do you cover? I said, well, we've been covering COVID.
mm.
We've been covering, every
We're in a
during the whole
pandemic.
pandemic, where I'm covering COVID all the time.
Yeah.
He gave me this anecdote about how, when his wife was pregnant, they went to some circus show, and because he knew how much the sound could affect the baby, he was afraid that, all of the things he knew about what sound could do to a baby, or before it
Uh-huh.
was born, made him acutely aware of all the things that could go wrong. So then he
Okay.
transitioned that into, listen, you've been covering a lot of really stressful things. And as a journalist, you also know how to research things. You know all the things that could go wrong with COVID.
Uh-huh.
It went on and on and on.
Yeah.
Basically, to sum it up to, you know too much. And so that might be changing how you view your illness.
It's your perception that's wrong.
Yeah, it's your,
It,
and here's like something that I
that's
also
bad.
want to
That's
highlight about gaslighting is
mm,
people assume that gaslighting is like these menacing, mean
mm,
doctors who are just, no, you're crazy, get out of my office. That's not always how gaslighting happens.
no.
Oftentimes it could be well intentioned. This was a
Mm,
very nice person. He was
uh,
well intentioned. He just, his training, his worldview, perhaps his implicit bias
mm,
made it so that there's no way that this is not, no, this is not what you're experiencing.
that's
You're
it's
you
impossible. Yeah.
And so they kind of project that onto the patient. And
Yeah.
with doctors, I've had situations where
Mm,
another physician, during that time, I was having a lot of bulging veins, and that's, because we're now learning how COVID
yeah.
affects the blood vessels,
Mm,
and they call it vasculitis. And
yeah.
so I had never had like really weird stuff going on
Yeah.
and I was having like blood pooling in my
Mm,
legs. And I remember showing this to my primary care physician in North Carolina, and nice woman.
Mm,
But she said, "Oh, I have that too. Look," she physically pulled off her gloves, showed me her hands, and said, "We just get that with aging. We just get that, it's." And so again, it's this kind of, when I think people think of gaslighting as like the get out of my office, you're
mm,
crazy type of stuff, but
no,
it's the little nuances that make you question what you're experiencing as
exactly.
abnormal.
So I have a little story about that. Yeah, so I was once getting the kind of infections, for example. Um, and basically, so I went to a special doctor for it. And so I'm like, hey, I have all these symptoms, these issues. And it was during the pandemic at the beginning of it. And I'm someone with like, I have like some heart issues and, compromised. And so I'm wearing gloves because it was a hospital, COVID patients. And I go in there and tell him these symptoms. I'm like, so what do you think's going on? He's like, honestly, I think you have anxiety issues. Cause yeah, he asked me like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a full-time student. And my response was like, well, no, I don't think that. I'm not very stressed and I'm doing quite well. And he's like, no, 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 listen to me. You have anxiety issues. I'm like, I don't think I do. I'm like, you're wearing gloves. I'm like, we're in a pandemic. And yeah, it's like he wasn't kicking me out of the office, but he's like clearly trying to steer it in this direction. I'm like, dude, I don't think you're right. And I don't know. It's like they'll ignore. Like I'm mad you were just like, what about all these other physical symptoms I'm having right now, or like the veins? It's like this was never like this until that, and it's like they'll just try to kind of make you think of a certain diagnosis, or and it's like I don't know. Like I guess that's gaslighting in a way, but
I mean, what you
yeah.
just told me is absolutely gaslighting. Yeah.
And so it's like, is your goal here to actually listen to what I'm telling you, or are you just wanting me to think a certain way? And
Yeah. I'm sorry that you experienced that.
yeah, so and I've heard that from a lot of people, like, and especially in terms of like COVID and or in these kind of things. And so I don't know. Whenever I hear these kind of stories, I'm like, yeah, I know what you've gone through, and that's just it's a really bad feeling to get told that from a medical professional. Because like, 'cause I think in some degree we hold them to some kind of higher, they're doctors. Um, and so man, I can't imagine your mental health going through all this. I'm just kind of blown away that you're like vertical right now after going through all of that.
Well, I'm semi-vertical. I am in, I had a relapse actually after about a year of healing. So I'm doing a lot better than I was
That's
late
good.
June.
Uh,
But it's still, again, it's a process.
yeah,
I say they don't call it long COVID for no reason, right?
yeah.
It takes time. It's not like I have a relapse and then I'm back to normal within a week.
Mhm.
Like it can take months.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
so
yeah. It's not gonna be like a snap your fingers and like man, I bet like being able to go on walks and like I said, just being able to pour your own, so just being able to do things for yourself. Because like losing all that independence, like having to rely pretty much 100% on other people. I mean, man, that would just I don't know. How did you describe that? Like, what was that like? I mean, just going from this like super independent, interviewing presidents, just just doing your own thing to like full on now I need help doing basic tasks.
yeah, um, it was devastating.
Yeah.
It it was devastating, but I want to make a caveat that I am actually privileged
Hmm.
to have the help. As much as it hurt to not be able to
Yeah.
take care of myself, there's people who have gone through long COVID alone.
That would
And
be ugh.
my heart goes out to them and my respect goes out to
Yeah.
them because that is a tough battle. Um, but having my family and even my husband's family who are absolutely wonderful,
Hmm.
they stepped up too. Everyone in my life, my close circle, stepped up to help me. And so even though it was horrific to have
Yeah.
those things taken away from me in such an abrupt way,
Mhm.
it was also a beautiful thing to see of pure love and
Yeah.
sacrifice. And that is something that I absolutely will include in the writing, is what the 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 things that I witnessed during that time. I saw the ugliness of
Yeah.
humanity, but I also saw the purest, most beautiful parts of humanity as
Mhm.
well.
You saw how
And
loved you really are by these people.
yes, I mean, there was a point I just think of this scene, and I mean, I don't want to spoil it for the book, but I'll describe it much more in depth there. But there's just a scene that sticks out in my mind where, um, you know, I'm naked in a tub. My mom is washing my hair.
Mhm.
She's physically washing my hair. She's pouring the water over me, and I look over at her, and at this point, it's hard for me to speak. We're just
Mhm.
looking at each other, and I reach my hand out just to hold her hand, and she just sits there, and we just look, and like it makes me want to
That's
cry.
beautiful.
And we just,
Yeah.
it's those moments to where, yes, I'm deteriorating and unable to take care of myself, but the pure love of my mother.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm at my most vulnerable. I'm like a baby again, right? Like
Yeah.
she's bathing me.
It's like you don't get
And
more
to look
vulnerable than
over at
that.
her and see her eyes, which were so full of pain, but she was strong enough to smile at me through that pain
Yeah.
because she knew how scared and how much suffering I was dealing with. And to have that kind of human connection um, was something unlike I've ever experienced, and
Beautiful.
perhaps will ever again. Um,
Yeah.
and so
Wow.
writing about these horrific instances juxtaposed with these moments of love and family and sacrifice is really what I want for the book. I'm at the beginning stages. You know, I have a bit of the manuscript and
Mhm.
proposals, but I'm in the querying process, which is as a debut author, I suppose, is quite an eye-opening experience.
What has that been like for you?
I'm sure what it's like for many authors, soul crushing,
Yeah. Yeah. That explains it pretty good.
but you know, I, I I don't want to speak for other people, but I think as writers, we kind of anticipate it a little
Yeah.
bit.
You know
Like
you're
we
gonna get
we
a
don't
lot of
we
rejection.
deal with enough rejection to where even in our own minds, we're like, this is crap, this is crap, this is crap. Oh wait, and then
Yeah.
you read it again, you're like, let me rewrite it. Let me, okay, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it. Like
Exactly.
we have that self criticism.
Mhm.
So then, when at least that's how I think
Yeah.
about my writing. So you know, we go into it ready, like we have our armor on, ready for the
Mhm.
rejection, and that's how it plays out. And you know, all you need is that one person who believes in you, and that's what I keep telling myself.
Exactly.
um
You need
and
one
so
win.
yeah,
Like you can get
and
100 rejections, you get one win and you're good.
exactly. And I know that that agent is out there and that
Oh yeah.
publisher is out there, so I am just, you know, focusing on that, trying to work on the writing in the meantime, doing research in the meantime, but also taking care of myself. I'm
Yeah.
still, it's interesting because writing about a new illness that's kind of
Mhm.
unfolding while you're experiencing it
Yeah.
is a unique kind of thing,
Yeah.
because cognitively, we know how much it takes to write a book, a
Quite a
lot
bit.
of
Yeah.
cognitive exertion. So writing it in the way that I would have before I got sick,
Mhm.
just I've accepted that that is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And taking my time, um just letting it play out the way that it's supposed to play out. But yeah, the querying process is definitely interesting. But it's a fact. It's a fact
Yeah.
of what the process is like. And so I just keep going. I keep querying, so
You
to
just keep,
speak.
you gotta keep on going at it.
Yeah. And the people who like, even it's honestly like, even if I get a rejection email, it's, I see that as better than getting nothing.
Exactly. It's like you're
Because
actively doing it. You're actively
yeah, they
taking
took the
steps
time to
towards
look
it.
at it. I know, and sometimes they'll even,
Mhm.
say something positive about the
Yeah.
project, and that it just isn't the right fit or
Yeah.
whatever.
It's also subjective. Like,
Totally.
something I always say is like, I have a big bookshelf. It's like every book on that bookshelf was literally rejected by dozens of agents. Like, like, look at like Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. People were saying he would never get published. Like 20 publishers were like, no, this is crap. And so it's like you never know if you have like this amazing story. Like it happens all the time that you get that one agent, they publish it, and boom, your career explodes. So I never think it's a good way to judge your manuscript for getting rejected by agents, because it's like it can be completely unrelated to your book, and they're just like, this isn't really my taste.
Yeah, I agree.
What has your process been for writing this book? I just imagine it's one of those things where it's like you have so much to say, probably, that you have to like almost narrow it down.
Yeah, that's been a really tough thing to work through, because this book could be a big
Yeah.
book. And
Well,
I've gone back and forth
Mhm.
with if I want to only make it a memoir, or if I want to make it a memoir mixed in with some narrative nonfiction / original
Okay.
reporting, right?
Mhm.
And I think, well, I've come to the conclusion that I do want to interweave that, because I think it
Okay.
would be a mistake not to,
Yeah.
because of just what I know, my experience, my
Mhm.
skills, the sources that I have in the long
Yeah.
COVID world. But it's so I made the decision to start writing the book pretty early on,
Mhm.
while I was still in it. And that's, some authors may hold off until they've reflected a bit on the
Mhm.
experience. But the way that I saw it was, I want to write about it in its rawest form.
Yeah. Like
And
you're
so I
you're not
started
gonna get more
writing.
accurate than while you're literally going through it.
Yeah, and it was cathartic,
Mhm.
and I'm still going through that catharsis while
Yeah.
I write about it. But so what I've done, logistically speaking,
Mhm.
I've actually written out scenes that I remember, that I
Oh,
recall. And so
that's
what I'm
fun.
doing is, like, there's specific scenes, because a lot of this, I'm cognitively impaired, right? But there's
Yeah.
things that I remember very
It just really
vividly.
stuck out to you.
Yeah. So that's a sign
That's
that I
yeah.
should probably write about it. Um, and so writing, journaling kind of, I had kind of a free write session, to where every memory, every scene that sticks out to me, I wrote down. And
That's smart.
so as far as the structure of the book, I'm still working on that.
Mhm.
But I know overall what I want to include, and kind of the arc that I want to tell through each scene. And with each scene, the story progresses,
Yeah.
right? So at least that's kind of where I'm at. I have a 55-page manuscript, so
Oh,
I'm
that's great.
writing, at least so far, I've written it chronologically,
Mhm.
which I don't know, as I continue to write the book, if that will be the case. Maybe I'm just dying to write this scene that was kind of toward the
Yeah.
end of the journey, as opposed to the beginning. But it's been quite the adventure, to write my first book about something so personal.
Yeah. That'd be really hard to like. Yeah, well, it's hard to put yourself out there and just open up like that. I feel like
Yeah,
naturally we're kind of all a little.
and like in a way, and the story itself is like not in the best light.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows, there's other themes that happen of strength and perseverance and courage and survival, but there's also some real raw vulnerability that
Yeah.
I want to showcase. That's, you know,
That's what makes
I
it
think is
special.
also equally as important
Yeah.
as the kind of hopeful narrative.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to kind of feel like, I'm just thinking like starting it? Are you going to show like the rise of the journalism career and then kind of the
So I
down the
started, so okay, I guess I'll spoiler
little
alert. And
spoiler?
this may change, right?
Yeah,
If and when I
exactly.
get an agent, this may change and they may go,
Mhm.
I think we should actually start here. But so
Yeah.
far, where I'm starting is the election night, and I'm starting to have
Oh.
symptoms. And I'm in a hotel in Matthews, North Carolina. When why the hell am I here? I'm supposed to be in New York. Like I'm supposed to be in DC. Why
Yeah.
am I here? And then I go into how I'm quarantining. I'm feeling these aches. All I want to do is take a bath. And baths are kind of a theme throughout the book because
Interesting.
of um, how I used it throughout
Mhm.
my illness, again with my mom, and then throughout the kind of the healing process and the what it represents.
Yeah.
And so early, I opened the book with me taking a bath in a hotel room because I'm so achy and so tired, and hearing kind of the chime of my laptop in the background of me having to, I need to get, like, there's footage of voters waiting in line and it needs to go to air for CNN.
Yeah.
And I'm like living in these two different worlds.
Mhm.
And eventually, I transition out of that. With eventually testing positive, returning back to the home. At that point, I experienced two traumas with my father, who had difficulties with his acute illness that I described. And then after that, I transitioned to the first kind of inkling of things are not right, what those symptoms are. I
Yeah.
show, I wrote down, of course, as a journalist, I try to
Sure.
record everything. So I have in the book of like day one, these symptoms, day two,
Mhm.
these symptoms, day
That's
three,
nice.
these symptoms. And then the
That's
story
cool.
progresses. And I will say though, so I went to Germany in November of 2021 to get some type of treatment as a study participant for long COVID. And
Wow.
so the way that I want to include the reporting in it is almost as if, I don't know if you've read Hunter S. Thompson, but the way he kind of writes, which is, I love his style. He writes as if the reader's on the ground with him. The reader, so,
Okay.
and that's kind of how I want to have the reporting play out. Like, for instance, I'm on a plane on my way to Germany. The doctor tells me that the answers could be in the blood. And
Mhm.
so having
In
the
life.
reader, instead of like, this study says this and this, like,
Yeah.
bringing the reader along with me into the halls of Congress, into
Mhm.
these labs where they're studying long COVID, into the homes of patients who are facing eviction, and doing almost a stream of consciousness with that reporting. Because he brought a lot of his own voice into his reporting as well, while
Mhm.
still telling a story journalistically.
Because you can do that. I'm thinking, so are you gonna write it almost like it's, I guess, like, I wouldn't say a diary, but like a sort of
Yes,
like, okay, you are going that route.
a little bit.
Okay. So yeah, then
Yeah,
you can definitely bring in the reporting aspect of it.
because you can include, so if I'm recording things on my phone, I have the physical documentation, or if I'm taking notes, I have that documentation, but I can write about it. I can write about this reporting, you know,
Yeah.
from my perspective,
That's what I was kind of thinking about because
while still
that'll flow
including
very
that
naturally.
dialogue as it
Mhm.
played out.
Did you so like if you were going through this, did you keep taking notes? I mean, obviously you couldn't at certain points.
While I was really sick, there was a point where I stopped taking
Yeah.
notes because I couldn't anymore. But when I got to California, I'd say around 4 months, maybe 3.5 months, I started doing a symptom journal again, which I still
Okay.
have, and I'm glad I have it because I'll be able to reference that.
That's what I was thinking. Like that would be like perfect to put in the book. Just to
Yeah,
like show the realness to it.
yeah. And I'm, my sister-in-law was actually the one who suggested it because, she works in healthcare and she
Mhm.
thought she wasn't even thinking of the book. She was thinking like, oh, this might be good to show to your doctors,
Yeah.
just to have
Oh yeah.
something there. And it actually is going to serve me
Yeah.
really well in the writing process. And it's kind of interesting to look back at it now too, to
Mhm.
see my progress, just personally, to see
Yeah.
how far I've come.
To see it, wow, I actually went through as you're like turning the pages, I went through
You
all
see
of
the
this.
improvement
Yeah.
and it's
That's why I'm kind of thinking
hopeful.
you probably see that like reverse bell curve kind of almost.
Yeah. And
Dang.
I do want to say healing
Mm.
it's not a straight line, right?
No.
You have good days and bad days
Yeah.
and days or weeks perhaps. Like I could have a great week and then the following week I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? I'm in this hole forever. And then the next week
Yeah.
I'm good. And it's like one step forward, two steps back. So it's it's been a hell of a journey.
Isn't it crazy? I mean, like, so you're going through all this. Like, could you even fathom the idea that you would be like doing so much better to the point where you could write a book about it? Like, it's just kind of crazy to conceptualize it. Like, you went from, like, especially on the mental standpoint, like the worst possible to so cognitively good that you can actually like write a coherent book and story. Like, I mean, that fact alone is amazing.
It's incredible. Just oh, I don't reflect on it like that and
Mm.
most of the time because I'm still in it.
Yeah.
But you're right. To go from where I was
Yeah.
to doing something that is hard for even the most
Right.
cognitively healthy person,
Yeah, there's some really smart people who
um,
can't like write a book. Like that's pretty like
it's
really
a
difficult.
it's a big leap.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of myself, but I'm also so thankful for my
Yeah.
family. And it's not easy.
Uh-uh.
It's not,
No.
I'll be honest, writing a book while you're dealing with long COVID is
Pretty bad.
it's not easy. But I
Pretty
also
bad.
have I know that I know there's an urgency to this story. And I think that pushes me
Yeah.
to write, even when I may not be ready. And it is weird too, because I've talked about this on Twitter is like, for some reason, writing is easier than reading for me. Even when I'm kind of going, even when I'm
Interesting.
foggy
Oh.
and someone, they pointed something out. It was a doctor who has long COVID. And
Mm.
she said, you know, when I was losing the ability to read and write, my like medical knowledge was pristine. And so maybe
Interesting.
it's it's easy for me because those muscles are so developed
Yeah.
that
It's so instinctual for you.
yeah, yeah, that I can I wrote my CNN article in May of 2021. And so that was still like 6 months into the illness.
So you were
And
pretty bad at that point.
yeah, yeah,
You
I
wrote an
was still
article.
I wrote that was the CNN piece and like,
Wow.
but as you, I mean, you had mentioned you read it and you can probably tell from that writing, like it was very honest.
Yeah.
I was if we're having a frank conversation, I was scared
Oh,
about sharing those things, especially with I'm doing it on a platform that is huge.
yeah.
And so, yeah, it's,
Your art,
oh,
I do, I was like, because it was so different than anything you really read a lot. Like, it seemed like, especially like long COVID and stuff, like you talked about, there's not a lot of reporting. And then just to like read yours, and it's like normal. Then you start to talk about the symptoms. You're like, whoa, wait a minute here. And it's like, wow. And it kind of blows you away what you're going through. And it's just one of those stories where you just reading it, like, I can't believe this is real. And yeah.
yeah, that was my goal. To because I didn't believe it was real when I was going through it.
Yeah.
And so to at that point, I just wanted to raise awareness. It was
Mhm.
June of 2021, and I wanted people to know what this illness can really do.
Mhm.
Um, that was, and to make people feel less alone who are reading it, who
Yeah.
have long COVID.
Have you
Uh,
talked to a lot of people who've had long COVID?
yes.
Like,
Uh,
I can imagine hearing your story would just, I mean, that would be something that's really motivating. I mean, to see how you just went from really high spot, really down low, and making your way quite steadily upwards out of that. Especially,
and there's a lot of there's been a lot of pitfalls along the way. Like I'm open. I want people to know that I didn't get super sick and then healed and now everything's great.
magically,
Like I
yeah.
still I it's okay to still face
Yeah.
um these challenges because it's a really nasty, unpredictable disease. Um, but as you can tell, I can speak, I can write, I can do
Yeah.
these things again. So I, I do want to be hopeful to other long
Mm,
haulers. And yes, they have reached out to me, and I try to respond to every single
that's
DM that I
awesome.
get from them, just because I remember how scared and alone I felt during that time.
And
And
just having
also,
so little information on it. Like,
yeah, and
who do you talk to?
well, I found a group from Body Politic. It's a long COVID
Oh,
support group, and I found some friends that I still consider
well, that's
very
awesome.
close, dear friends
Mm,
that I'm going to include in the book, and how much,
it's great.
we helped each other
Mhm.
um, through this time when no one could help
Yeah,
us. All we had was each other to talk about our symptoms, what we were
exactly.
experiencing, learn from each other, be there on our bad days, on our good days too. So
Mhm. Did you guys have kinda, like, similar stories of, like, going from career to just boom? Or, like, how did theirs kinda compare to yours? Without, getting super in.
yeah, we I wouldn't say similar in some ways, but
Mhm.
different
Yeah.
in others. It's interesting because our group comes from all different walks of life.
Mhm.
There is there's no one there, I'm the only journalist, let's put it that
Yeah.
way. But there's, a mom who has two small children and has to care for her children while she is battling long COVID. There's
Wow.
a former bartender who can't do that job anymore because
Yeah.
he is still 2 years later, not able to stand up for 12 hours a day and sling drinks like he used to. And
Yeah.
he can't do it. And there's someone who had an autoimmune illness before this, and is kind of familiar with the medical landscape, and
Mhm.
is a dear friend of mine actually, and she has started her own clinic to help people with chronic illness. So
That's amazing.
all of these kind of interesting stories and different paths that crossed
Yeah.
um, is fascinating, and we all met at a very vulnerable time in our
Mhm.
lives, and I call them my war buddies because we've been in the trenches,
You
and
went through it, and they can actually
they know
relate to
me.
you a bit.
Yeah, yeah, They're amazing people.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Absolutely.
What
Thank you for having me.
so I'll link your Twitter. Are there any other links you'd want me to put in the bio?
So I actually have a book that's coming out in November that I'm a
Oh my
contributing author
goodness.
for.
Oh,
Yes,
okay,
it is
okay. Let's take a
called,
minute.
yeah,
Talk about that for a second. Wow, that's exciting.
it is exciting. It is actually edited by Fiona Lowenstein, who is the founder of Body Politic, who is the group that
Oh,
helped me so much. So it's kind of this full
wow.
circle thing. But I've written a chapter about long COVID and mental health,
Okay.
and it will be out this November. So what is that? In a few months.
Couple weeks.
A couple, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
that like
thinking now, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be
five,
out really
6 weeks.
soon. It will be
Sneak it up
sold
on
by
you.
all major booksellers, Barnes and
Wow.
Noble, Amazon, Bookshop.
Can they
So I'd
pre-order
be
it?
happy. What?
Can they pre-order it right now?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, shoot me a link to that.
I will absolutely do that.
Wow, you've been productive.
I've been, yes, probably too productive, but
I
yeah,
bet that just feels so nice though, to be able to do that. Like you're getting back in the groove. It was a slow build upwards, but it's like you're finally kind of getting that independence. You're getting your career going, and just dang,
it feels wonderful.
talk about just a wild journey.
Yeah.
I mean,
And if any agents see this,
uh,
I'll like do like a plug. Call me. But no, it's sorry. I didn't even mean to make you
Mm.
hope.
Oh goodness, sorry, got a little cough. That's funny though. Yeah, if you've enjoyed this interview, just wait until you read the manuscript.
Yeah, DM me or email me. I'll send you a query letter.
That was awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.